starts on a Thursday afternoon at 4, or they have to be sitting around waiting for this and then log in, and then you know, they have to want to watch. So we need to build up those followers. Anyways, we are live, and we're just going to give people a couple minutes to join if they want. Thank you.
We're also working on intro music. Several composers have.
That's weird because I'm facing this way, but there's such a lag. All right, welcome everybody to Martinis with Scott, episode 2. Last week we were with Tom Clausen of First Vancouver Finance, and we had some audio taping issues. We rescued some of it, but this week we have dual recordings, so we have a redundant system, we have a producer, and so hopefully we capture all of this, not just most of it. As usual, Martinis with Scott brought to you by Sinclair Range. Sinclair Range is an advisory firm in New York, Toronto, and Calgary. We provide management assistance and consulting in both turnaround and high growth situations, and the related investment banking that goes with that. So companies that are looking to raise capital, senior financing, a number of services. You can check out the website at sinclairrange.com. As I said, this is episode 2. Things have been going well apart from the technical side. Everybody's excited to come on and visit with us, and it's really been a great experience so far. And I want to thank our guests today. We have Jay Richardson here to my right. Jay is a senior advisor at Sinclair Range and CEO of EnerSpar, and he'll talk more about his career in a minute. And I have Rick Williams to my left here, who is president of Blackwell Investor Relations and Waseco Resources, and a director of a bunch of companies that he will talk about. We have Olga Jelani over here, who is vice president at Sinclair Range. And before we start, we need our martinis. Ashley's going to help us with that.
The whole purpose of the afternoon.
That's right. What do we have coming here, Ashley?
We are having a classic martini made with Tito's vodka.
Tito's and olive. And we have some vermouth in
And
this
a
one,
dash
right?
of vermouth.
Dash of vermouth. We don't know that Jay's ready for just straight up
Winston,
glass of vodka. This
Winston Churchill only looked at the vermouth bottle. When
That's
he was
right.
drinking martinis.
That's right. We're in the Sinclair Range offices today on Bay Street, 20 Bay Street.
Well, can you have one today?
I'm good, thank you.
Rick, are you sure?
I'm sure. Thank you. Rick plays basketball later.
There you go.
Cheers, everybody.
Cheers. Good to be here. Thank you.
Cheers with your water.
Thank you.
All right, Jay. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your career? I think I've known you since 1997.
That's
Plane
correct.
Tree Systems.
And Plane Tree Systems was my first experience as interim CEO of a listed public company. Prior to that, I had been, to a great extent, a unconventional chartered accountant in the Big 8 public accounting world. Having been a partner of Clarkson Gordon in Vancouver, I demonstrated my unconventionality by moving my career to Singapore as a partner of Arthur Young, and then to England as a partner of KPMG before coming back to Toronto and hanging out my shingle as a company doctor. And so there were a number of engagements before Plane Tree, including assisting Paul Cantor in the dying stages of Confederation life, but it's been an exercise basically in serial turnaround engagements, troubled situations, always dealing with problems, and in the public accounting world, never having anything to do with auditing or tax or accounting, always in the transaction-based services. And since Plane Tree, for the last 20 years, it's been another 4 or 5 interim CEO of listed public company in engagements, about 15 or 18 public company directorships, and I'm currently CEO of EnerSpar, which is listed on the Venture Exchange, and I'm a member of the board of BackTech and of Waseco Resources.
And you have an unnatural love, irrational love of junior mining.
I think
Relevant to today's discussion.
Any love of junior mining is irrational and
I
unnatural.
agree. I agree. Rick.
Well, my background is started legal, but my interest is international corporate commercial. So I started the career over in Paris and decided after a year that I should, as a Canadian, have a little bit more experience and expertise on Canada. So I came back here and had a lot of offers in the banking side, on the international side, but decided to go with mining and found a position with a company that had operations in South America and the States and Quebec. So I got to use my languages and stayed in that industry for the last 30 years. I met Jay when he was with Plain Tree back.
No, before that, actually,
Really?
it
Yeah.
was Medicine Partners.
So that goes way back, some 30 years ago. He was working with a classmate of mine at the time, and we've kept the friendship and the relationships going. And so I've stayed in the junior mining, retired for a year or two, played with the kids, came back out, and set up Blackwell Investor Relations, which provided investor relations services with the legal elements, which helped on the filings and news releases and compliance, and have come back into the business and stayed with it.
I blame Rick for all of my involvement
Really?
in junior resource world, because it was meeting him through Madison that he then fished me into Waseco Resources, and it's been downhill ever since.
So you're still on the board of the company that you started your whole industry
experience
with.
Yeah.
We'll get back to that.
Yeah.
Olga.
Well, I have a little bit less experience in junior mining space than you two. I started off at Dundee Capital Markets, or formerly Dundee Capital Markets, in the mining group. And I spent 2.5 years there in the investment banking side, and then I left, took a little time off, and then I joined Sinclair Range about almost 6 years ago, and since then I think we've the broad spectrum of industries that we've covered, the companies that we've worked with. I mean, it's too many to name really at this point. So my biography is a little bit more brief than yours.
So today we're gonna talk about junior mining, exploration, predominantly in Canada, and we're doing that because it's timely. PDAC was what, 2 weeks ago? 2 weeks ago. That's the Prospector Development Association conference. Is that what that stands for? I think so.
Prospector and Development.
Yeah. How was you were out of the country?
I got 2 hours at PDAC before I had to step on an airplane, so I don't have big reports from it.
And this is the largest conference in the world
Correct.
for junior miners, correct?
Yes.
Well, for mining, period.
For mining,
Yeah.
period. So
About
how was
25,000 people attending over the course of 4 days.
all of them drunk?
But occasionally.
Yeah.
A little less.
These days?
It's toned down quite a bit.
How was it this year?
A little quieter, but again, there seems to be a hope and some prospects that things are turning.
It's one of the great things about people in the junior resource industry is they're always hopeful.
Always hopeful.
Short on hope.
They did something different this year. They had an entry fee, so it was $25 a day. And
Just to go walk the floor.
just to walk the floor. Now, interestingly enough, the conferences were free, but
Okay.
the investor booths were charged, and then the equipment booths were you had to pay to get in.
The conferences being the
speakers, the newsletter writers,
not just the pitches,
not
but the
just
actual.
pitches, more technical pitches and company industry pitches.
Why did the Egyptian mining sector cancel? Do you know?
No.
They were last on the agenda and they canceled.
Yeah, no, we don't know.
I'm interested in this. There's political changes afoot in Egypt, and we have a project there, and so I was curious about that.
Well, the one that affected me, the cancellation, was the Barrick in Newmont had 9 people that did not show up, and their booth space is 3 times the norm.
Right.
They had 1 person manning their booth because
to be a bit embarrassing.
everybody else went to New York to try and deal with the Barrick
Take
Newmont
over.
merger.
Yeah.
Are you going to tell us about your project in Egypt at some time?
If there ever is one.
Oh, okay. We'll
It's
take
an
that.
ongoing negotiation.
We'll take that as a promise and
Yeah.
an indication of your optimism.
Yeah.
So you've been infected
for
by this.
clarity, and we don't really have a project there. We have the hope of a project there for years. It's been going on.
More hope, just like.
I'm going to give you a couple of stats just quickly. The TSXV, the Toronto Stock Venture Exchange, which is the junior listing of the Toronto Exchange, has 1,830 stocks on it. 490 of those are resource stocks that are under 10 cents. That's more than 25% of the entire exchange. The CSE, what is that, the Canadian Securities Exchange?
Yeah.
That's an over-the-counter, right?
No,
No.
it is a stock exchange like the venture exchange. It's just a more junior one. It's more recent and it's more oriented to the cannabis industry.
496 listings in total, 161 are resource stocks under 10 cents, which is over 30% of the entire exchange. Now, I didn't go into the research on this, deeper into the research, but if you're under 10 cents, you're not trading, right? There's no liquidity, roughly speaking.
Not necessarily true. And in fact, part of it is a cultural difference that varies around the world, because in Australia, for example, almost everybody's under 10 cents and has hundreds of millions of shares outstanding, sometimes billions of shares outstanding.
Yeah, I guess like this.
And that's just the way they like it. They seem to take to it. Not sure why.
But as a rule of thumb, if you're under 10 cents on the Toronto Venture Exchange, you're probably not trading very much.
Some do, some don't. The fact that you're then considered to be perhaps in the realm of the near dead is
Right.
maybe a way to put it.
Well, to me, I separate in my mind entirely the value of the business and its project from the stock. So when I say there's no liquidity, I don't mean that the business is bad. The business could be great. It's just that no one's following it, and there's problems, in raising money sometimes, or people getting exits. I mean, that's just my view on it. Does that ring true to you?
There's been a shift in the industry over the last few years. So many of the small broker dealers are gone. Many of the banks now are looking at wealth management, so it's not really, they're looking at dividend stocks and
Right.
preservation. It's not, so the speculative sector has suffered a little bit. I think we have to share the area with the marijuana stocks. We have to share the area with the blockchain stocks. So that whole area, but the brokerage firms, I think, have been, their regulatory hurdles have increased $1 million in the last few years in back office compliance. So it's very difficult for them to be in this
Right. That
field.
makes sense.
And it's also as easy to raise $5 million as it is $500,000 when you're talking to institutions. They can't play this market. So there's been a shift over time, many shifts.
So who does play the market?
It's still individual speculators.
Yeah.
So the retail is there, but it's a little bit more challenging even for them to get the information.
So if you're the CEO of a junior mining company with a cheap stock, what I just heard from you is that the role of individual market makers is more important than ever.
It's challenging, and marketing is a challenge.
Yeah.
Differentiation. Yeah,
So let's see. So that leads us in. I wanted to give those facts just to lead us into your views on the state of the industry in Canada right now. Are there any bids? How are the volumes? Is there any liquidity? Just the general state of markets. I remember the three of us used to sit at highs in Toronto and talk junior mining with godfathers of the industry for years. How long did that go on? 20 years, like a long time.
I'd say longer than that, but you know, there certainly has been a changing of the guard. The good old gang is slowly withering away and turning up their toes, and you know, arguably Rick is one of the grand old men of the
Moving
industry
that way,
now.
so
That's
sponsorship
right.
is changing.
So
definitely.
one of the million little kernels of wisdom I took away from those drinking sessions was the view that forever in Canadian markets you would have, at junior mining, you would have a little bull run of say 5 years, and most of it happened in 6 months to 9 months, and then it kind of stayed steady, and you had slow growth from there, and then there would be no bids for 15 years, like a long.
I hope it's not that bad.
And I don't have any science or math on
Yeah,
that, but
no.
that was one of the kernels I always took away, and it wasn't that there was a gradual decline; it was that there was no bids.
I don't think
Victor used to think very strongly about that.
Yeah, I don't think it's that bad, but it is, as I said, it is a challenge, and there is a shift that's taking place. And again, you can look at it if Barrick now is leaving Toronto, that's another. You know, we lost people with Inco and Falconbridge when they left. Toronto as a center, as a mining center, is also being affected. So that plays.
Interesting.
And arguably, it's even worse than it used to be, because now, for those who are looking for excitement, who are looking for rapid in and out, and trying to skin a few pennies off of anything very quickly, a lot of them have been attracted to ETFs. You know, there's been a lot of money drained out of the resource world in the last few years.
But that's because there's no gains. It's a
some-
circular argument, right?
It to some considerable extent it is, yes.
Yeah. So where are we on that cycle, do you think?
Well, it was interesting at the Cambridge show in Vancouver, they had Rex Murphy speaking, and he was explaining that we've got the mining industry is what gives us the cell phones and the laptops and the cars and everything that we really use in society. And on the other hand, we also have then the energy, and,
Right.
and both of those are under attack, and the time frames for bringing these
From a
things-
regulatory, environmental,
yeah.
indigenous,
It's-
all
it's
those
getting
perspectives.
longer,
Yeah.
and the view is that it's how is that for society? But he's saying, look, we have to revisit this and rebrand, because these are
Canadian
important.
mining, we need to rebrand.
Mining in general,
Yeah.
mining period and energy period.
Yeah.
These are important things. This is how we get around. This is how we live.
So what you're saying is the cycle's broken, and until we fix that.
I don't know if it's broken, but it needs adjustment for sure.
And how does, let me direct this to you, how does that impact the IR and promotion of the stock? What do you need to do as a company in this space to get yourself noticed and get some attraction?
That's changed over time as well. Going back to the brokerage, I would think one of the big switches is the analysts used to be very powerful in the industry. They've lost a lot of the impact because the information is readily available online to some extent. And to put it in a very pejorative way, they become shills for corporate finance.
Right.
So whatever the firm does, that's what they're promoting, and that's what they're getting paid. So they're trying.
Yeah.
They've lost a little credibility now within the firms. I think the brokers have a lot more independence as well. Before, there was someone saying, "This is what we're looking at. This is what we're selling and buying, and we'd like people to focus on this." But now the brokers are independently doing whatever they want in terms of
Really?
recommendations. Yeah, I don't think it's as firm as it was.
Okay, so that
Years
creates an
ago.
opportunity.
That creates an opportunity on an individual broker
Yeah.
basis.
Oh, family offices and that whole trend, is that getting any traction?
I'd say that we're below the dignity of most family
Yes.
offices. They don't think we even exist.
Yeah. All right.
I think there's private money that's interested, definitely, in getting into these areas and taking large positions, but that's a different issue then.
Right.
And there's a lot of private money interested in the space, but that still doesn't solve the challenge for the public companies.
Yeah. Jay, I want to just comment on RTOs. So this is people that have projects and they merge them into an existing public company, a shell that really has no assets, and it's a quick way to go public and
Or a CPC, which was set
Or-
up specifically for
right.
exactly
In
that
Canada, we
purpose.
have a specific program with the Toronto Stock Exchange, the Venture Exchange, to set up clean shells from new as opposed to an old company that's
CPC standing for Capital Pool Corporation, being a corporation whose only business is to find a business that wants to do an RTO with it.
right. So one of the things we advise our clients, and I need to say that Sinclair Range and myself, we're not in the securities business. But of course, we're part of our practice is management consulting and giving advice on capital structures and business valuation. Excuse me. Sorry about that. And RTOs are a significant part of junior mining. They're a significant part of the cannabis sector, which is really hot in Canada that we all have some experience with. A significant part of the blockchain sector, which is really hot in Canada, although not as hot as cannabis. And what I tell them,
It was hotter a year and a half ago,
Right.
and it has basically fizzled with the peaking of the price of Bitcoin and a good healthy dose of skepticism about that whole cryptocurrency world.
so the what I tell our clients is, because they all think, okay, well, we're going to reverse into a public shell, and then we're going to be worth a lot of money, and we can raise a lot of money, and everything's going to be great. And what I tell them is, much along what we've already spoken about here, the cannabis boom, as an exception to what I'm about to say, is that's just probably not going to happen. I mean, the odds are, from a statistical perspective, that you're not going to be trading very much, and you're not going to be valued very high, unless you purposely treat your stock as a different product and promote and market and get out and give the word. And I don't talk about
And develop a following.
and develop a following. And I'm not talking about, having a press release every week. I'm talking about having people hustling and marketing your equity position as hard as you're marketing your commodity or your cannabis
I
or your
often-
Bitcoin. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I often tell people who talk to me about the possibility of going public that unless they want the CEO to waste half of his time dealing with investor relations, that is a poor plan, because that's one of the corollaries of going public, and a lot of them are astounded at it. They think, like Conrad Black, that it's just a cheap way of being able to get money from the public. It's a very difficult way of getting money from the public, and when you're talking about RTOs, I don't know if you're aware, but EnerSpar, in fact, currently is involved in a transaction by which we are, to be very irreverent about it, selling our listing to a company that wants to be public, and we're taking
You're going private?
we're not going private, we're taking the assets that comprise our resource project down the north shore of the St. Lawrence, spinning them down into a new subsidiary. We will dividend that out to the existing shareholders and then get another listing. So we're basically cloning ourselves. And the fascinating,
Why do the last part? Why get the other listing?
because our shareholders expect us to be public. They're infected with a disease.
What's it cost to maintain that new listing? $500,000, right?
Oh no, the annual maintenance cost is between $50,000 and $100,000.
Including the people you need and the auditors and the reporting?
Yes, because we don't do any investor relations.
Okay.
We're not believers in trying to promote. We have a bit of a following.
Right.
We're one of the lucky ones that.
I mean, if you were to look at every junior mining company that's struggling, 90% of the carrying cost is the public shell. Right, like paying your license fees or your lease fees and whatever.
Well,
and
unless you're doing work.
unless you're drilling.
Sure, drilling.
Right, but your carrying cost in a hunker down
I would say
entirely relates to the shell.
it would average 150,000 and without the salaries of the management.
And I think it'd be fair to say, Rick, that out of the 150, there is a modest amount allowed there for investor relations. And if you're doing zero investor relations, you can actually get away with between 50 and
I was
100.
saying an average.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
I think, Scott, that what you said about, RTOs, and this is not an easy way to just get money aside from being in the hot cannabis sector, could that just be a universal lesson that unless you're in the sector du jour, that it's difficult anyways. People think like going public, public money versus private greed,
Right.
it'll be fine. But no, it's a lot of work, and
Well,
at any point.
You just have to look at the stats.
Yeah.
Right, you're looking at 30% of all
But I'm
listings.
saying this isn't unique to this point in time, but unless you're in the hot sector of any
Correct.
point, it's hard work. Yeah.
And you need to treat it as work.
Yeah.
What about, Rick, cross listings? I haven't been involved in the RTOs, the Sinclair range. As I said, we're not in the securities business, so we're not hands-on with that. We're helping management teams, but I think there was a trend a while ago where you could cross list on the AIM or in Frankfurt or somewhere, and by doing that, you would hope that it would create increased liquidity, and the arbitrage would sort of mellow out the lack of bids in Canada.
Well,
Is that still happening?
It's happening, and the cross listings were quite useful a few years ago. There was a lot of interest, primarily in the junior resource sector in Germany. So that created a lot of interest and brought in a lot of buying. So that's dwindled a little bit. There are people now looking at places like the Isle of Man and Malta. You could get a listing there, and then it's a little bit cheaper to get in, but you don't have the listing process is different. I've listed on the full London Exchange. I've listed on the Amex. The Amex was really good. They provide some services that we don't have here, but again, the sponsorship is what's really lacking right now in the industry.
Right.
The firms aren't behind it, and it's not booming, so it's a challenge.
Just more water there. Martini?
I think I'll just yours.
We got
this
your
one.
beer as well.
I guess it's gonna be a long afternoon.
Well, we are going to the wine club after as
Excellent,
well.
that's what I wanted to hear.
Ash, I'll have it on the martini.
Yeah.
That's not as depressing as we're making it sound. This is
No, I got
it down.
Has it?
Yeah, I think.
I don't want to make it
it's a good-
depressing. I just want to.
It is challenging.
My main message is that people in this space and people doing RTOs in general think that's the end of it.
Well,
Right.
that's the
They-
beginning.
They're largely naive.
Yeah.
Who think, my goodness, I have matured, I'm a public company, I can now go out and pick people's pockets, and this is gonna be easy street.
I think you're actually taught that in business school. Like that's in a textbook. That's
And maybe as a status to aspire to, Olga,
True.
maybe it is an interesting, senior part of the corporate world. When you look at the big businesses that are household names, almost all of them are public companies.
naturally.
And to your point, Rick, I think at the end of this, I want to talk about the upside. I mean, you've made a great career out of exactly this. So it's not all negative.
No, there
Right,
are
there's
times,
lots.
there's cycles.
There's cycles, and you need to position yourself. And there's even ways to live in the bad times.
Correct.
Right? So we're going to get to that. I want to talk to that as well. But I think what I've been trying to communicate with this and using junior mining as an example of it is exactly what we just talked about, because we just see all the time, particularly with cannabis, having led the way and raised the value. What's the price of a shell in Canada these days?
Well, there was a brief period when it was said to be as much as $2 or $3 million.
Yeah.
And in fact, the deal that we've been able to do in EnerSpar, we were successful in getting about $2.5 million for selling the listing. But since then, it has come back down to earth, and it's said now to be more like a million and a quarter.
And 5 years ago, it was 200 grand, 150 grand.
Yeah.
Right, so that just tells you the supply and demand. That's the interest in shells.
And the main reason is that people perceive the RTO route as being a faster way to achieve the public company status. Well, thank you.
With the expectation that they're going to be rich and famous with the public company, which is my point.
Yeah.
Right. Olga, you want to talk about M&A?
Yeah, I think specifically to the mining sector, and that's something you kind of touched up on the Newmont Barrick's offer for Newmont, what kept PDOT fairly empty for those two.
Rick is an expert on this subject because
Perfect.
Rick has recently been dealing directly with Newmont on an M&A possibility.
So we're not going to ask about Newmont specifically, but on that deal, Barrick's offer on announcement was an 8% discount to Newmont's price. When I was still in banking, like the premium started with a 3. That was standard, and it went up from there. Although the deal is shut down now, and Newmont went home with Goldcorp. How do you think this will change the industry and M&A and the precedent that it set? I mean, it's a giant setting a precedent. Somebody's going to follow it. What are your thoughts on that, on the premium specifically?
Well, the rationale for the premium not being there was that the savings being achieved were
Right.
going to be in the range of $5 billion, and that's still there on the joint venture. So that was the rationale for not having a
Right.
premium.
And I think arguably the whole takeover offer that they knew was going to be rejected was a ploy to get to the joint venture, was it not?
That's possible. That's possible.
Just to tie him into the discussion is what you're saying.
Yeah, the premiums haven't been there in a number of the M&As, not just mining,
Yeah.
but a number of the M&As, even on the marijuana side. And then in a couple of the mining deals where the premium was there, the discount that the stock has fallen back to eliminated it.
Right.
Essentially.
Yes.
So if you were trading at 30 cents a year ago, and now they're offering you 15 because you're trading at 10, you're not quite where you
Right.
would like to be.
Right. So is that notion of chasing savings and protecting the downside as opposed to looking for? I mean, before like M&A, press releases for mining used to read of saving costs on the per ounce production, or upping your gold production, your combined production would put you at a better place with your peers. So now you're kind of moving towards protection of what you have, or savings, if you put it right.
There's
And
two
that's-
motivations.
Right.
One is to be bigger so that you can catch more attention.
Yeah.
Everybody needs to be a million ounce plus
Right.
producer. Arguably, in today's world, they would like to be much more than that. The other is cost savings by combining head offices, but to a considerable extent, that is suggestive of, well, you weren't very efficient beforehand. This is basically
Right.
giving you an excuse to slash and burn.
Right. But what I'm getting at is that you hear companies seeing premiums and upon announcement of canceling projects. Like Iron Gold canceled the Cote mine, canceled a $1 billion project, and it's like a 20% bump the next day. Eldorado.
Doesn't that just suggest that management is completely out of touch
That's-
with what the
That's
shareholder world
precisely
wants?
that's precisely it, and they're just trying to at this point show savings rather than show any sort of hope of upside. If we're going to stick to our hope theme, what are your thoughts on that?
The average grade of gold being mined today is 1.4, 1.7 grams. 10 years ago it was 10 grams. So
40, 50 years ago it was 1.4 ounces instead of grams.
it's so there's it's getting tighter.
For sure. So
Yeah.
thank God the technology has improved that you can now make money doing that.
Maybe.
So we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah.
I think that can change very quickly again. This seems to be flavor of the day.
Fun fact for our viewers is that 1 kilo per ton, the grade for that is called bonanza grade. That's something everybody knows when they haven't been in mining for a long time. I just think that these things need a fun fact. It's called bonanza grade.
You just don't see it
You
anymore.
don't.
I'm
It's-
sorry.
No. And I think the third topic that Scott and I kind of discussed is that the way that mining is going in Canada, Waseco has their main project in Nevada, correct me if I'm wrong, right? Which is the number one. The Fraser Institute puts out an annual report ranking jurisdictions. Nevada is the best place to be in the world right now. Saskatchewan's third.
Really?
Yeah. Ontario is number 20, and last year it was number 7. What are your opinions on the mining environment in Canada? Quebec, I remember in 2012 was number 1.
Rick
was number
loves Quebec.
Who doesn't love Quebec? Yeah, but Quebec is now number 5.
Right. Well, they brought along, they updated the way you could get your claims. You could go online and stake claims instead of going out there and putting your foot on the ground. So they became quite novel in that regard. They still have better flow through, which is a tax advantage for investing in Quebec.
Yep.
Their
Which was
regulators,
actually partially developed by Ned.
their regulators were on top of things. They were cooperative. Part of the reason I think Canada's been slipping is because we keep introducing additional consultation elements. So everybody and their brother can say, how about the noise pollution, or how about the air pollution, or how many trucks are on the road, or whatever's going on. So the longer it takes to bring in a mine, that's gone from a few years. Our friend that we used to have drinks with at Highs brought in a mine without getting any permits. You couldn't do that.
Wouldn't he?
One would be in jail.
Was that in the 1800s or what was that?
He was
Got some
quite-
old friends.
He was quite proud of that, but I met the mine manager who wasn't quite so proud of that, because he said that was him who would have gone to jail. But now the time from discovery to production continues to extend across the board.
Isn't perhaps one of the most egregious examples, and perhaps part of the reason that Quebec has slipped somewhat in the rankings, that in Quebec now there is a province-wide ban on uranium mining, arguably because of the risk to populations. Well, if you look at a map of Quebec, there's about 98.5% of it is got just close to zero population in it, and so.
How many uranium mines are really in Quebec? They're mostly in Alberta and Saskatchewan.
So there are some good occurrences.
Yeah.
There has been some potential.
And the most the winner in the lithium race is the Masca resources, and that's out in Quebec as well. I think that's kind of where the province is. I mean, it's got a lot of greenwashing, with the lithium mining and the clean technology, electric vehicles. I mean, it's sorry, these are great mics, by the way, don't worry. I tested them out. And Masca came out as a leader for that. When I did lithium mining deals, I mean, there's a plethora of them everywhere from Australia, Latin America, and Nebraska was just kind of like the odd man out. But and part of that is because Quebec has been very friendly to them specifically.
And what's going on in Ontario?
And what do you think about what can Ontario do to bring back the ring of fire development and stuff like that? Like what can we do?
Well, that access is a big issue there. How do you
Infrastructure.
They could have, instead of spending $1 billion on adding a couple of subway stops here, they could have opened up that whole sector, and it would have created more jobs and more wealth for the country. That's just a decision. That's a political decision. When you look at the difference between the Detour mine and the Waseco mine, and they're just across the boundary, theoretically similar. The grind was a little harder in Ontario, but hydro costs are higher in Ontario.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's a big differential when you're dealing with something that's close to marginal in terms of grade. So
Yeah.
those are factors that kick in.
All right, let's talk about some positive things.
That'd be a change.
Without giving any stock advice, because we're not in that business.
disclaimer.
How do people make money in this? What should they look for? I remember we were sitting around Highs, and how long ago was that? Remember the guy that bought the helicopter? He just hung around, would buy 3-cent stock of whatever, and then all of a sudden, in 6 months, he hit it big, bought a helicopter, and never heard from him again. Do you remember that guy?
I know him well.
Yeah, he was a good guy. Yeah.
He's an ex Air Canada pilot.
Yeah. And God bless him.
Yeah.
Good on him. If you're just interested in this space, give some advice.
Management.
Yeah.
And then the project. Those are the two key elements. And the third one would be financing it. But the management, if you go with the right management and they have the wrong project, they can remedy that by finding the right project. If you go with the wrong management and they have the right project, they can mess it up.
Yeah.
So start with the management.
Okay. And what's hot?
And management is very close to what I was saying earlier about following, because there's a lot of people like Rick are going to put primacy on management, and that then creates a following, and you need a following to get the promotional activity that is going to get you the returns that you're pointing at.
But on the project side, I mean, what do you look for specifically? I mean, 5 years ago,
Which ties into what commodities are hot these days.
that's first of all that's one. But even on those, what if having a multi-phase project was very advantageous 5 years ago. The fact that you could develop a mine in a year and 9 months, a small one, and go from there and self-fund. Is that still important, or in your eyes was it ever important? That's what I've heard in the market a long time ago. For me,
The mine you develop, like every once in a while, you'll have someone come in and say, "I've got a small mine, and that you could start with a wheelbarrow and then go to a truck and then go bigger and bigger." It doesn't work that way. When you find a deposit, you find out how big it is, how big a processing plant you need, and how much money you need, and you develop it accordingly.
And all of the regulations, the 43101 requirements are oriented to that process and to getting you to do a feasibility study that says, if we get to this scale, there's what the returns ultimately are gonna be, and that's an 8 or 10 year process.
your project's not at 43101.
Yes, it is.
It is? Okay.
Sorry, not in Nevada.
That's what I was gonna say. Nevada.
That's
yes.
his project.
Sorry.
Mine is in Quebec.
Okay.
All right, you want to talk about Waseco?
A little bit.
Yeah.
Let's get at it.
Why not?
Tell us about it.
It's a good segue.
Well, it's a 30-year-old company, but a few years ago we took on a project in Nevada, and part of the reason we took it on was the fellow who discovered the Carlin and Battle Mountain trends in Nevada went to Tuscany, and while in Tuscany did a comparison of the geology and found that they were comparable. And while in Tuscany, he noticed or knew that they were mining mercury and antimony.
Okay.
And he postulated that the mercury and antimony are pathfinder systems for bringing gold up from underground. And he thought that those antimony and mercury deposits should also be tested for gold, because gold wasn't tested in Nevada until the 60s because it's not visible.
Okay.
It's very finely disseminated gold. So with that theory, we went over to Italy and had some good food, great wine, and found it very difficult to do exploration because of the process there. They're not as sophisticated as we are here in terms of precious metals. So a drill program would need an environmental impact study before you drilled and another one when you finished drilling. So that process took about 6 months to do one drill hole, which then added the cost of having a geologist for 6 months without any news, plus the capital markets here didn't really believe that if you did discover a deposit, you'd be able to mine it because it's beautiful Tuscany. As it happens, there are over 50 mines in Tuscany, mainly doing quarrying of granite and marble and other things. But be that as it may, that model, we applied it to Nevada, and on the property that we have, which is a relatively small property, there was an antimony showing, and we tested that for gold, and it ran, and then we drilled it, and it ran quite high.
Oh,
So everybody in
and
the
no one
camp,
had thought of that before.
people had thought of it, but no one did it.
Yeah,
The whole camp has been looked at for oxide ore, which is at surface, low grade, and so they weren't drilling very deep, and they weren't drilling for something deeper down. Now this model suggests that there might be a big ore body at depth. No one's drilled that far. So we hit 25 grams over 12 feet in a camp that's mining 1.4 grams. So that's a pretty good
Yeah.
discovery hole. We followed it up with 7 holes. All 7 holes hit, not as high grade, but good.
When did all this happen?
This was in 2013,
Okay.
and for the last couple of years, we drilled to within a few feet of the northern boundary of our property. And this is an area that was checkerboarded by the railroad companies, the Santa Fe Railroad.
Rick has referred to it as a relatively small property, but its enduring characteristic is it's immediately adjacent to a formerly producing Newmont mine of some significance.
Well, we're within 10 kilometers, there's 40 million ounces of gold, so we're in the middle of one of the world's richest mining camps.
It's almost as good as Rafi's project.
Almost.
And so there's gold
His is
on,
above ground.
All you need to do is scoop in with your beach shovel.
There you go.
I'm in.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt.
That's all right, that's all right. So there is an oxide zone that goes on to the adjoining mine, which is Trenton Canyon, but we now have another zone of much higher grade, which needs further exploration, but we drilled to within a few feet of the boundary line, and I was interested in getting the property that ties on, because we can see visually that it continues onto the other property.
Hmm.
And for the last 2 years, we've been talking to Newmont, and that discussion has now stopped because
Sure.
they're in other discussions that are more important to them. They
Right.
don't-
So where's the stock at now?
We're at 4 cents.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to raise some money and do some more drilling.
And you can't raise flow through because it's not in
Can't raise
Canada.
flow through for a US project.
Right. And but it sounds like you've got great metrics, so you should be able to raise.
That's not, yeah, I don't think it's an issue. I just didn't, for the last couple of years, we didn't want to do work that would increase the cost of acquiring the neighboring
Right.
property.
Yes,
Either
that
to
makes
us
sense.
or-
Move the market against yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
And
So people should be getting into Waseco, not that no securities advice.
it depends on your
Your risk tolerance.
risk tolerance and financial ability, but it's a very interesting project.
It's a highly prospective situation.
How do people learn about it?
We have a website. It's wasecoresources.com. The symbol's WRI, and we are listed in Germany. We don't trade that frequently over there at the moment.
Yeah.
We do have a good shareholder base. And one of the nice things is there's 40 million shares outstanding. We've done one financing in 30 years. So we've kept a pretty tight
Yeah.
rein on
It has
on the
never
company.
been consolidated.
And I wanted to bring these guys in because I wanted to set the table for liquidity and where we are in the cycle and RTOs, which is a current topic in Canada, and the struggles and your investor relations. But you hit home on really, I think, the end game of this, which is really important, which is it's about management, right? And you guys, apart from being good guys and friends, your effective integrity level is very high with both of you. You've got oodles of experience, so when you're looking for a management team to follow, my view, you guys are the guys.
And unfortunately, that continues to be a problem in the junior stock world, whether it's resources or cannabis or anything else. And I could tell you stories about shenanigans in the cannabis world.
You don't have to. I know those shenanigans.
The integrity of management to me is the most significant element, because they can loot you and rape you fast enough to make your head spin, and it just is the sine qua non of any investment to me, is that you can walk out of the room leaving your wallet on the table and not be concerned that management
Right.
is going to steal it.
And it's, I didn't put out the stats on this, but there's shockingly few new mines
Oh, yeah.
in Canada or anywhere in the world.
Anywhere in the world.
Anywhere in the world.
Number of
Like-
5 million ounce, there haven't been any discoveries, 5
Right.
million ounce in the last
Yeah,
100
but
So
even with
arguably-
all this exploration and all of
Yeah.
these thousands of companies in Canada alone that are junior miners, rarely do we open a new mine, right?
Which means that the fundamentals are a wind behind you.
Exactly, and it means that, you know, there's a lot of drifters in the space,
Yeah.
and
Well-
you need to attach to a management team.
And we haven't talked at all, we should touch a little bit on the gold price and how
Yes.
that's determined and how that's set, because obviously that impacts. If people think that gold is going up, then there's more interest in the sector. And where we are in the cycle there is interesting. One of the next things to watch is at the end of the month, Basel III kicks in. And this is the fallout from the 2008 debacle in
Yeah.
the financial sector. And
This
so-
is how the banks account for their,
It's
Well,
the reserve.
their capital
requirements
reserve.
That,
Yes.
that
Yeah,
gold
so-
is now permitted to be counted amongst your reserves.
So gold is now moving up to tier 1, but in addition, they're doing mark to market. They're allowing mark to market for gold. So for the banks that have bought gold 30 years ago at $400,
that's new?
They'll be able to book it at whatever the current price is, 1,300. So we might see, that might have a positive impact on the gold sector.
We could do a whole other podcast on that, because remember I was sitting, the University of Ottawa Business School is branded Telfer. And I sat on the Dean's Advisory Board for a while. I forget what we were at, but we were at some sort of discussion with Ian.
Yeah.
Sprott was there, and somebody else from this whole, what do they call it, the Gold Council? That they all kind of controlled or use, still do.
Big
or-
bugs.
Big bug. And what I didn't know is we took all the gold in the world, there isn't much of it,
No, there's less.
It's in a football stadium.
It
for
fits in a
example.
football stadium. right? There's nothing, I mean, this is all synthetic.
Yeah.
This
Well,
entire
it's not
industry.
synthetic. To the ones who are believers, and you know, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool skeptic, but there are reasons to be a believer that this is something that over the millennia, not just generations and centuries, over the millennia, gold has been a consistent store of value.
Yes.
And one of the endearing characteristics is that very thing that Rick was referring to a few minutes ago about how the current discoveries and the current mining operations are from skinnier and skinnier resources, that we have passed through peak gold and we're now in a world that is expanding gold resources at a decreasing rate.
Yeah.
So
I like how you said that you're optimistic because you're a constant skeptic.
You've convinced yourself.
Okay, just focus on that, right?
Talk yourself into it.
not sure that I want to go back to that one.
Yeah, you know, in 2012, well, I mean, early 2000s, there was many of the mining companies had a hockey team, or they would combine and they played hockey, and that was like a networking thing. There's one company that had their mining team, and it was called, and they had it actually written on their sticks, and it says 2,000 per ounce. That was the name of their hockey team. Just talking about optimism, right?
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
What else? Anything else? We've been an hour.
It's been a good time.
It has been. You got anything else you want to talk about?
Well, EnerSpar is currently halted because of the transaction that we're undergoing. But when we come out of the halt, we're going to be doing an issue that's going to be a combination of flow-through and hard dollar shares. And we're going to be spending about $1 million and a quarter dollars to prove up a resource from this formerly producing mine that dates back to the 1950s. And at that point, we are then going to have North America's #1 resource of potassic feldspar. And that is a very significant element in the glass making industry. So in the context of the solar energy world, because it is a hardening agent, it's a significant input to solar glass. So we think we're onto a good project.
We're anti-solar at Sinclair
I was
right now.
just gonna say.
I didn't realize
No, no,
that I was
but,
stepping into a den of skeptics.
Sorry. Maybe you can convince us to have hope. But you know, how many?
Well,
how many?
the cost of solar energy has
Yeah.
gone down below the alternative cost of gas.
And what's the cost of
Right.
setting up a solar project?
The all-in production cost, including the capital cost, means that the energy cost from solar
Mhm.
is now less than from gas, let alone from coal or petroleum or anything less.
We did the numbers last time, and they came in high.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
But we were, that was the jurisdiction. We were doing it in Hawaii.
Yeah.
Right? And it was 4.5 times the national average.
High real estate values and
No, the real estate was nothing.
And
It's the people.
The
I was
labor.
gonna say,
Yeah.
high labor costs.
Yeah.
You got a lot of
Ironically,
competition,
yeah.
a lot of competition from the
Yeah.
vacation.
Yeah, and they have a mandate to be entirely,
Entirely green energy by 2045.
yeah, that's not gonna happen.
And they're
Not
actually
at those
well on
costs.
their way. Yeah.
But the the capital cost was astronomical. I forget, you know the numbers, I forget what it was.
60 million, yeah.
And then you sell it in the grid and you're talking
10
8
cents.
cents, 10
Yeah.
cents. Like you need 16 to break even. Wow.
Yeah.
So it's not gonna happen on those numbers.
I will argue that if you look at the shape of the curve of where the production costs have been going over the last 5, 10, 15
Oh, it
years,
comes down a lot.
that it's only
Oh,
another
for
2 or
sure.
3 years.
I don't know that the capital cost has come down, but the output,
Oh, it
the
has.
yield, the output
Yeah.
has gone up a ton. But this will be a topic for another day, but the environmental impact is huge. Did you see that article? And it was just the other day, I think it was the Wall Street Journal, about the 20 years from now, how many tons of unrecyclable solar panels China is gonna have. And it's the worst thing ever.
That is a concern.
Yeah.
I did not see that. That's a concern.
EnerSpar, how do people learn about it?
EnerSpar.com, and we were in Cedar and on our own website, and we are a very small situation. We have 23,960,000 shares outstanding, and we're trying to go places. So there you go.
Right. I think that's a wrap.
Thank you very much. It's
Thank
been a
you.
pleasure.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
It's been fun. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.